Check, check. Check, check. Check. Morning, everyone. We're going to get started here with our second presentation, 2 of 3 on our campus transition plan. This Sunday we're going to go through some information on our finance committee. So just kind of a refresh, within our campus transition or building plan group of people working on this, we've got 3 subcommittees. We've got the building subcommittee, which we did a presentation in January. Today is the finance committee, and then in March we'll be doing a presentation for the fundraising subcommittee. So today we're going to talk about finances. So just like last month, we're going to try and get through this information in about 45 minutes with you. We're going to have a PowerPoint slide deck we're going to show. We're going to do a Q&A session. If it runs a little bit longer than that, that's fine, but the goal is to try and get through about 45 minutes. The other thing is, because this is finance related, you know, there's going to be a lot of numbers on the screen. We're not going to try and bore you to death with a lot of details on those numbers, but we need to go through them with you. Really, the goal is to get you thinking about, you know, when we talk about a capital project, a building project, you know, think about how we approach that for this project to get the church built, and what we're maybe going to need to do differently for the next project moving forward, just kind of because of the size and scale of the project and the numbers we're talking about. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the president over to Matt and John Suttner, 2 gentlemen that are kind of leading that subcommittee work on the finance side, and we're going to go through this slide deck. This is meant to be interactive, so if you have questions, please stop us at any time as we're going through this. The other thing we're trying to do is, because this is being recorded and there are a significant number of people that will view this online and remote, we want to make sure that we get all the questions captured on mic and the answers captured on mic this morning. So if you do have a question, we're going to try and run a mic back to you to get the question asked today. So with that being said, we'll get started. Does anyone have any questions before we start? I guess let me ask that. All right, we'll get started then.
All right, thanks, Dave. Can you guys all hear me? Sounds good? All right. As Dave alluded to, I'm Matt Suttner. This is my brother, John Suttner. We actually send our children to Bethlehem Lutheran School. We chose to send our children here for the values that John Kuyat and everybody within the congregation has lined out. We do not, however, attend church here, so we kind of bring a little bit of a unique perspective, but I think through this, hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions and things like that. The first slide here, I just wanted to show you, this is our agenda. So we're going to first go through the historical cash flow of the congregation. Then we're going to jump into where we're at with the church loan right now. We'll look at some of the project costs. I think that's kind of be a little bit of a rehash of what Jason presented about a month ago. And then we'll look at some lender feedback and what's going on there, as well as probably the big piece here is number 5, which we'll talk more about the cash flow projections, and then, you know, what's next. So with that, we'll kind of get right into the historical cash flow. So what I wanted to do first is kind of boil this down into an easier thing to read. If we were to look at Steve's cash flow stuff, there's just a ton of line items, but I want you to kind of think about this from a perspective of your own household, right? So you have your income coming in, you have your expenses going out, and what's the net cash flow? So the first thing we want to look at here is, if we look, these are the actuals as well as the budget for this year. So over the last 3 years plus this year, you can see that we have the gross income. So that's our gross income, and you can see it's been rising actually on pretty good rate, starting at is at 800,000 and goes up to we're projecting to do 1.3 million this year. Part of that also is the building on the cross income. So really, if I can help you understand that, we actually have an obligation of about $10,000 per month for the church loan itself, but there is income coming in that is earmarked to pay the church off, and that's what you see with that building on the cross income. And you'll actually see that in the second to last line item as far as what the actual or what the building on the cross mortgage is. And then you can see the actual expenses. So from a gross cash flow perspective, you can see we've been in the black for the last 3 years and projected to be in the black this year. We typically run like a break-even budget as we can. The next piece, though, is that debt reduction. So we have, like, for example, 2020, 2021, the building on the cross income was actually about $225,000. But the debt obligation was only $120,000, so we're actually paying the church off quicker than that, and that's what that additional $105,000 is. So you can see that the net cash flow is a little bit up and down, but we're able to float that through just retained earnings and things like that. The next part that we want to kind of walk you through is the church loan update. So the original loan started in 2019, January. It was about 1.7 million, has an interest rate of 4.5%, and again, like I mentioned, monthly payment of about 10,000. Right now, it's actually being housed at Waukesha State Bank. It was just recently purchased from the LACE organization, just earlier, I think, 2023. The current loan amount, however, though, is $856,000. So we've paid off basically in the last 5 years, went from 1.7 to 856.
Yeah, so I guess I just want to emphasize that to everyone in the congregation to kind of restate what Matt said there around the building on the cross mortgage obligation, which is about $10,000 a month, but then with the additional payments per principal that we've been able to make because of the generosity of our congregation, that loan is getting paid down much faster than what that $120,000 per year would be at, right? So that's the really good news about that, and that's kind of the blessing that we've received from this congregation because of the generosity, is we've been basically able to have that principal amount on that loan in a 5-year period. That's just an amazing thing that we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, great point, and that kind of alludes into this next component here. You've paid it off, or paid half of it in 5 years. Basically, you have about another 5 years on that same trajectory. So if we go to the next piece here, so project costs, again, kind of rehashing what Jason talked about a month ago. Wow, this did not flow through very well. I don't know why they're not aligned. Sorry about that. But the school project, we're looking at about $7 million. The ELC would be about $2.75 million. The gym is just over $4 million, and then the extra classrooms, if we go from the current classroom footprint we have today, but adding an additional 4 for having a single classroom for each class itself, it would be about an extra $1.4 million. So the total building cost would be about $15.25 million. However, we do have some other expenditures that will be in play for sure. These are all still kind of up in the air, as we alluded to about a month ago, but part of that is water and sewer, bringing that up here. Jason talked a lot about that. Thinking it's probably going to be at least about $600,000. The playground is going to be about another $300,000, and then also we need to consider some additional furnishings, desks and things like that, would be about another $200,000. So the total cost, if we did all of this at one time, so to speak, would be about just over $16 million.
So I guess I'd like to pause there, and we've run through a few slides here just to see what questions we have or feedback that anybody has. Mark, can you blow that up full screen again? That slide, thanks. Like when Jason did his presentation back in January, we showed some of the same information around projected costs. If you remember from that presentation, we walked through kind of the physical layout, right, of the site and how that would work, where kind of our first initial plan, that ELC portion, the 2.75 million portion would basically sit just west of the sanctuary here. That $7 million school building would sit kind of to the southwest. The gymnasium would actually sit kind of back behind the church here to the south. And then the extra classrooms would extend out to the west from the school, right? So if you remember, when we talked about this, we said we were trying to figure out ways that we could potentially break this project into phases, right? So when you look at what the total costs are to do the different parts of the project, it would be awesome. It would be great if we could come up with the amount of money that would be needed to do the whole thing as one scope or one project, but we really don't know how realistic that is at this time. So, questions, comments around the cost estimates or how those were arrived at?
Yeah, no. Check. Are
these the numbers if we were to do the project today, or is this projected cost in 5 years from now, or how does that work?
So, great question. These are our numbers basically based on what project costs would be today. You know, if you add in inflation to that, those numbers are going to keep going up year over year, right? But we spent a fair amount of time working with several different companies that, you know, can build out detailed budget estimates, and these high-level estimates are based on what costs would be today.
Good questions. All right, let's jump into some of the lender feedback. So this is a little bit of a smaller slide, but basically we've gone out and looked at 4 different institutions, so to speak. We're a little bit early in the process when it comes to looking at a lender per se. However, we have worked with LACE, which is the Lutheran Association for Church Extensions. LACE was the previous mortgage holder for the church building here. We also have worked with Wolf River Community Bank, as well as Wells Church Extension Fund, which is a CEF. And then also we're exploring some options with Thrivent. Basically, the nuts and bolts of this is that we're in a very elevated interest rate environment right now compared to the last 15 years or so. Historically speaking, we're actually kind of in the normal, but we do believe that we'll probably see interest rates come back down. At least the Federal Reserve has indicated that. Whether or not that spread from the bank mortgages to the Treasury number compresses back to normal, we'll see. But we're kind of based on what we'll see here as far as our build timing, we're a little bit early to try to nail that stuff down. But you can see there the piece on the left is that LACE is looking at, a 5.75% interest rate, whereas Wolf River Bank is a little bit more elevated at, call it 6.5% to 7.5%. So, but those numbers will change over time as the interest rate environment changes. The Wolf River Bank, as you notice, is a little bit higher rate, but they actually are a little bit more willing to get more creative. Oftentimes when you look at a bank loan, they'll lock rates in for maybe 5 years, and then you have to go back and refinance every time. They might actually be interested in doing a little bit longer, maybe doing some different types of financing to get us to a little bit better number. So it's pretty nice to have a bank that's willing to work with us on something like that. Let's see. The LACE, one thing that's interesting right now with LACE is that they've actually had a little bit of a compression in their total overall available funds as of recent, but they are on a campaign right now to increase their funding. So that number right now, although right number, I would say that they're a little bit, they might be a little bit less inclined to lend to us at the moment. In the near future, they believe that they'll be in a pretty good spot. So, yeah, we're just too far out to make a solid recommendation on that at this point.
Are there any questions so far on that slide, though, for financing options?
All right. So we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the cash flow projections. We spent a fair amount of time, actually a lot of time, really diving into the numbers of the church. And the school numbers to figure out where are we at today, and then if we were to make some of these changes, these additions, what would this look like long term? So we'll get into the first one. Well, talk about the survey results first. John, do you want to?
Yeah, as a result from the building committee's update a month ago or so, we had the respondents shown here. We had 138 people vote school first, 79 ELC, basically 2/3 school, 1/3 ELC. So what we did from a modeling perspective in the next few slides will be taking those, what we've been provided here and modeling out school first, and then we did also an ELC first option for us. So we'll kind of jump into that. Before we get in, you can hit the next slide. Before we get into the details, we want to kind of lay the ground for key assumptions that kind of cover a few of these cash flow slides that'll have all the numbers on them. So number one, we're assuming that we're going to run a 3-year capital campaign. That would be basically these upcoming years here that the fundraising committee will hit on here in March. Number two, we're also assuming that we're going to try to pay off this church loan in end of year 3 before we break ground. That's a big assumption. As we just got done talking about, we paid off half of the loan in 5 years. This would suggest we have to pay it off even a little quicker, or potentially have any larger donors come in at the end of the loan and try to knock that off. If we don't do that, what it'll do is just slide out the start date of the project. Okay. The third bullet there would be the phase of building. So we're assuming a 27-28 school year is the build, possibly ready for 28-29. This is all just kind of speculative at this time. Jason and team will help us with some of that as we nail down numbers. But that's what we'll have as a core assumption in these next few slides. And lastly, we worked with John Kuyat with just kind of aligning on tuition and enrollment forecasts. So number of students as well as tuition increases here for the next 4 years or so as a baseline. Any questions at this point? Okay.
Yeah, just to add a little bit of color for that second point to pay off the church loan prior to breaking ground. There is some, it really comes down to two things. One is it a priority for the congregation to make that happen prior to breaking ground on another loan? But also, will the lending institutions even allow us to carry a second mortgage, or we may have to refinance and bring all that together? So that's just some things that we need to weigh, and then you guys need to weigh as a congregation as well. So.
All right, this is gonna be it's an eye chart, I apologize. But when you run a project to the scale that we're looking at here, you really do need to look out many years. And so I'm gonna give you a moment just to kind of glance through, if you can read it from there, and then I'll touch on behind the scenes.
Did you need me to push forward? Okay.
Okay. So let's start with the assumptions. This cash flow slide is looking at if we were to run the school only first. Okay. Core assumption number one would be the capital dollar amount required to be $8.1 million. This would include the building of the school, running water, sewer, additional furnishings, as well as the playground. The down payment requirement for $8.1 million, anywhere between the 20-25% is the minimum. So you're talking about $2 million as the minimum down payment on this particular model. Assumption two would be the number of students here would be capped out at 150. And the reason for that is because in Jason's discussion a few weeks ago, there would be 6 classrooms. And so we're assuming about 25 students per classroom in here. Third would be the loan value. Up there you'll see at a 25-year loan, the monthly payment would be about $43,000 a month. In contrast, our current loan today with the church is about $10,000, so we're talking a little more than 4 times the monthly value. What I'd probably add on here though is if by running the school first, what this does not include is a gym at this point, and it does not include the ELC. So with a 25-year loan, it would really delay the ability to kind of add on that gym and or ELC in a near future view. So what we kind of layered in there was another bullet point basically to say, if we were to try to pay off the school in 5 years to try to get that next phase going, our monthly payment would need to be much larger, to the tune of $120,000 a month compared to our current $10,000 a month. So I'll pause there and then I'm going to walk through kind of some general underlying assumptions in the numbers. Any thoughts or comments so far? Okay, for gross income, it's the top left corner. Running from left to right, if you can see the numbers, it runs from about $1.5 million all the way up to $2.4 million. And the reason for those increases is primarily three things. Number one, number of students, it increases. Today at the school we have about 74 students. In this model we would kind of get up to that 150 range. So you're doubling the student base, which would bring in additional revenue. Number two, we would have tuition increases. So using John's assumptions, the next few years we have anywhere from, it's about a 20% increase, I think, year on year for the next few years. And then we even get a little bit more, we stay aggressive as this new school is built as well. And then we taper it off once the school is up and running. So you have tuition revenue benefiting us as well. And we split that out by community as well as member rates too. And then third, we have the behind-the-scenes general fund, the operating kind of components and giving of the church. That we also have kind of rising year on year as well, which we kind of look at historical, what's it been doing, but we have to use some sort of assumption to model it out into the future. So that'd be the income. The second line would be expenses. Similar concept here. The gross expenses of the church to run the church and the school, we're assuming some level of inflation here. Roughly 5% is what's in the model today. And that's kind of what it. The mortgage line, the third line there, you'll notice it goes from $120,000 a year. That's that $10,000 a month payment that we're making today. You'll see that jump to $496,000 or 500 grand in that third column. That would be the payoff of the church loan. And then the following year would be the school year billed with the new school loan at about $500,000 a year. I'll pause there. Any questions so far?
The only other note I was going to make, John, on that expenses is I think that also includes additional called workers for the school, correct?
Yeah, so in this view here, there would be 6 classrooms. Today we have about 5 classrooms. Next year we do have that 7th and 8th grade teacher, so that would be 6. So in theory, I think we do have the additional teacher modeled in for this view here. In total, the gross cash flow there, you do see red numbers. That would be a deficit. In total, over the 9-year view that we're looking at here, it's about $1.4 million negative. Now, what does that mean, or how can we overcome that? We're going to touch on a few things in the later slides, but to kind of put it in perspective, what would it take to get this cash flow positive? A simple way to think about it would be, instead of a 25% down payment, maybe think of it as like we would need a 60% down payment to kind of get this into a cash flow positive view. But I would also say that is still on a 25-year mortgage. So we'd still have to address the ability to do the gym in the ELC. John's got a question.
So just something to hit on too is, we've been making additional payments on top of that $120,000. So maybe you guys could clarify how much we're paying down our mortgage every year compared to the numbers that are shown in that school build year.
Yeah, so today the monthly payment is 10 grand, or the 120. If we go back, we don't have to go back, but if we were to look back at that historical cash flow slide, the summary view that I kind of use for the current BOTC loan is we've been paying it off double. So think of it as 240 grand a year in total. So you'll see the BOTC income line, that second row, we have 225,000 in the first column, 245, and then 180. So we're paying it off at a pretty good clip, but that value there would still come quite a bit less than the requirements that would be needed for a loan this size. So let me say it differently, John. If the loan minimum is 10 grand a month right now, we've been kind of paying, let's say, close to 20 grand a month, but the loan for this school view is 43. So it's even double that on a 25-year loan, okay? Yes.
I was just checking out the gross income line and comparing that to the gross cash flow in the model here, and I was wondering if you could explain why the deficit is reducing over time.
So in general, it's going to be a combination of rising students, rising tuition is probably the biggest factor in here. So our revenue is going to outpace the growth of our expenses here, generally speaking. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, that's right. Yep. Good questions. Any other questions before we move on to the next one? All right, let's jump over to the second cash flow.
Okay,
item here.
similar view here. Now that we're kind of grounded, let's look at the assumptions of this. This is school with additional classrooms. So this would assume 10 classrooms now instead of the previous 6. It would also bump your total student capacity from 150 to 250, which would then obviously brings into more revenue availability, but you also have more called workers to include in something like this. So capital here would be higher than the 8.1 million previously. This is now at about $9.5 million. This would be the building, the additional classrooms, running water, sewer, doing the playground and the furnishings. Again, no gym, no ELC. I think we touched on the total students at 250. For purposes of our cash flow here though, while the capacity is 250 students, we actually didn't get to the 250 by the end of this model. We actually ended at about 200 students. So sure, there could be some upside there. If we can fill the school more quickly, we could generate more revenue in the view or the modeling here. But we ended at 200 with the assumptions of current growth rates, averaging about in here 12% increase in students year on year. The monthly payment would be $50,000 versus, again, today our BOTC loan at 10. And if we were to pay it off in 5 years, it would be $140,000. All right, total cash flow, or the gross cash flow, you'll again see more red, which is the deficits. It would be $1.8 million in total over these 9 years. Similarly to the last slide, because we're really only adding an incremental $1.4 million of capital, the down payment equivalent would be over 60% that we'd want to be targeting to make this feasible. Because what you don't want to put the church in a position where the monthly payment is too great to handle, and that's what we don't want to do. Any other comments, questions on here? You'd have more called workers in here for the 10 classrooms, obviously, things like that.
One thing I do want to note too, these models are strictly looking at the financial piece of this. There is no other assumptions built in as far as labor from the congregation or help from Builders for Christ and things like that. We'll talk about that in a minute, but this is just straight line. If we have the construction company build the whole thing, we get a loan, and that's it. So there's none of that is built into this. So we will talk a little bit about that in the future, but I just want to let you know that.
The down payment on here too at 25% would be close to $2.4 million. So we'll kind of circle back to all of those, especially as we get into the fundraising committee in a few weeks. So then the third and final cash flow that we wanted to at least talk through a little bit would be, what if we did the ELC first? So there will be some differences in assumptions here. If the ELC went first, that would suggest then that we would open up some classrooms at the existing school location. That would be about 4 more classrooms opened up, so we'd go from the 6 next year to the 10 again, but that would be at the existing school campus, and then the ELC would be over here. So capital requirements for building the ELC, we're looking at about $3.3 million. That would be the ELC building, and then we did include water sewer for that. We can work through that with Jason and team too, but that's what we wanted to assume. The down payment would be about $800,000 on a capital project of this size. The monthly payment, $16,000 versus our current 10 today. And if we wanted to pay it off in 5 years to kind of get that school project continuing to move on, we were looking at about $46,000 a month to pay it off in 5 years. Total student capacity at the existing school campus then would increase obviously to that 250, but in here we did not model that school campus reaching the 250 students. We actually landed about 175. So we're going from the 74 students today to 175. It's mostly taking into kind of expected and current growth rates that we're seeing with students at the school facility. So you'll notice here, there's a lot more black on the screen. That's a good thing. That suggests that we can handle this new debt loan structure on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. But there's pros and cons to obviously doing either one of these first. ELC first, what does that mean? Well, we could get the ELC over here. We could free up space in classroom sizes or classrooms over at the existing campus, which maybe that would enable us to save longer or the appropriate value to do the school project at a later date. That could be a good thing. The flip side of that, though, is again, it would delay the school transition to this campus. So lots of pros and cons to weigh, and that's for all of us to debate and question. Oh, we got a question out here.
How would building an ELC first affect the staffing needs for the ELC?
Who wants to target that one?
Is Nikki here?
Nikki, you're here. Do you have any comments on that, Nikki? Not necessarily. We may not have all the answers today.
In general, it would make it easier for us if the classrooms were designed the way that they need to be. With that being said, if we build up here, we'd like to probably start off licensed right away because you're coming up with a blank slate. So then you are stuck with the ratios. You have to work every day knowing someone could just pop in and say, hey, how's it going? And you're under more requirements that way. So there's pros and cons to that. It would, in general, make our lives easier, though.
Yeah, to just kind of build on what Nikki said around the licensing. So the ELC, where we're currently sitting at the campus where the school is at in town, that facility is not state licensed, but we are able to operate the ELC there as part of that school. If we built the ELC first and moved it up here to this campus, like Nikki said, it would probably make sense. We would certainly design and build it out so that it could be licensed. It would probably make sense to get the facility licensed at that time.
If we become licensed, we can obviously increase tuition rates somewhat. We wouldn't go drastic right away because that's a big change. And then in the plans, each classroom could hold a double ratio worth of kids. So if we found the workers, we could double the size of the ELC.
Just curious how you're reflecting that in the model at all.
I knew you were going to ask that. We took a little bit of a stab at that, but without knowing all the details of that, we did not build out a really extensive model with regards to number of kids and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of used the same general principle of inflationary numbers and things like that. We did increase the number of kids, but it wasn't substantial. Yeah. In other words, there might be some upside to this. So.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there increased expenses having two campuses?
I would love to say no.
Yeah,
but.
well, question around increased expenses. So, you'll have incremental increases if we keep operating the existing facility in town, right? I mean, we've got lights and heat and, we have to have office staff down there. We have to have janitorial staff. So that doesn't really go away, right? And if we start converting existing ELC classrooms back to BLS classrooms for, additional called workers to teach at additional grade levels, we keep segmenting up those grade levels again.
those costs are not going to go away, right? And then you will have additional operating costs up here because, once again, you'll have heating costs, lighting costs, cleaning costs. So yeah, there'll be some incremental costs for just operating expenses.
Yeah, it's a great question. Is all that detail built in here? Not necessarily. We don't know exactly what it's going to cost us to run a new campus here versus in keeping the old one over there, et cetera, but that will all have to get factored in, yes. I guess maybe as one last side note too, do we want to speak on ELC gross and nets at all, or expenses? Do we need to comment on that? No? Okay. Any other questions?
All right, so at the end of the day, is this feasible? Well, it really depends. You know, obviously what we just showed you, some of these options are more financially feasible than the others, but at the end of the day, it really is, it's going to come down to what priorities the congregation has and which one would go first if we would actually go after this project. Our goal here, John and I kind of joked about it, we're kind of like trying to be Switzerland here. We just want to be bringing the facts, not having an opinion, and letting you guys kind of see what the numbers look like. So that's kind of what our thoughts are from a feasibility standpoint. What else can be considered? Again, like I mentioned earlier, I think there is a huge opportunity to leverage Builders for Christ. What that number looks like, we don't know yet, but it sounds like it could be relatively substantial. And so if that actually is an option that we pursue and get elected to participate in, it could significantly drive down our overall costs, and therefore we'd have to run the models at that point in time. But you know, I'm not saying it's suggesting that we're going to go from red to black, but it might bridge that gap quite dramatically. Labor support from the members of the congregation. I think I'm pretty confident there's people all throughout the congregation that have skills that they could potentially bring to help facilitate some of the building. So that's one thing that we need to look at. Also, you know, do we look at trying to prepare the congregation to increase their giving efficiencies? Maybe bringing some educational opportunities for that. Obviously, a huge number here is just grow the number of giving families. How do you do that? You know, these are all things that the congregation, I think, needs to think about. And then also potentially consider school choice. School choice is something that I think John Kuyak can talk to at some point, but it would bring a much greater revenue per student, whoever is enrolled in that school choice. But there might be some drawbacks, so we want to make sure that if that is something that is an option, that the congregation is well aware of all the different pros and cons to that. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
Our recommendation here is kind of threefold. One is to just remain focused on paying off the church loan. Having no debt or very little debt in the eyes of any lender is going to be super helpful from a financing standpoint. Aaron is going to talk in about a month about the fundraising aspect of this and how do you fundraise for a down payment and things like that. And then just continue evaluating the ongoing cash flow to service a new loan. I mean, that's just something that we're going to need to continuously kind of tweak and look at the numbers to make sure that as revenue potentially grows here and maybe expenses hopefully can stay level or slightly grow, what does that do to the overall numbers a few years from now? Question?
Did you guys look into, like, once we do make the transition fully over, what the cost of where, I guess, the real estate of where our current building is, what kind of chunk that would take out of the loan?
Are you saying if we would fully transition out, if we would sell the property? Yeah, looked at it a little bit. We don't have any hard numbers on what that would be or what the value of that property would be. It'd really depend on, you know, who was buying it and what they'd want to use it for. But there is some value in the existing buildings and certainly in the land itself that we have there.
That is not in these cash flow numbers too. That would be upside to help us, yes.
We did look at that as far as the old school, and when we do sell that. And basically what we were told is because of how the market fluctuates so much, to not even figure that as an income and as basically a benefit when it does come that time, that we'll get that extra money that's not even figured in anything.
So what's next? Basically, we're going to continue to have further conversations about this, right? We're going to hear from Aaron and the fundraising committee in about a month. We're going to obviously lean on Dave and the steering committee to develop our next steps and what we want to do and what the path forward looks like. Also, continuously evaluate the progress and the feasibility of this program. You know, if the congregation decides they want to do one phase or the other, we really need to make sure that we're on top of the numbers and making sure that those numbers are tweaked. I would add one more thing here. Just be on the lookout for some educational pieces. And I think the formatting got messed up on this too with the transition into this computer. But talking about giving efficiency and financial wellness, having a congregation that has a really good foundation from a financial perspective is going to be very helpful in this whole process. So looking at, you know, educational opportunities for what are qualified charitable distributions, what are donor advised funds, how do you become more efficient with how you do your giving, trying to take the IRS out of it. So from a tax efficiency standpoint, are there things that you can do to become more efficient with your giving? And then also, there's actually been a lot of success in many churches across the country at looking at implementing a Financial Peace University class, helping people get out of debt. And then that class actually talks a lot about tithing. So can you get more to, you know, more of a 10% giving rate, things like that. Those are some ideas that John and I have thrown around as far as how do we get to a better financial position long term. Not only if we do this project, but even the congregation in general. That's all we have.
Yeah. Open it up for Q&A, I guess.
It's not a question for you guys, but just a comment on Builders for Christ. So we have had some conversations about that, and it's definitely an option. But more than likely, if we do go that route, they would only do one project for us. So whether it was, say, if we did the ELC and we decided to go to Builders for Christ route, they would only do that, and then once we built the church, they would not. So we more than likely would only get one project that they would help us with. So just a comment on that.
I've got two quick. Just have you guys canvassed any other area churches and schools to see if they're adding on? Just because if there's a competition factor, that could go into those projections of 250 or 150. And then the other one is just, would there be able to be a study made for the expenses of the teacher salaries, ELC salaries, and what that would add? And then also just like the retainment factor and what the school and ELC would do to recruit families to join our school if we built and could have more enrollment.
So great questions. John, I'll let you have the mic.
Yeah, I'll speak to the first one just about, you know, local congregations and what they're all doing. If you look in like a, 20-mile radius, you've got St. Peter, Waiwega, you've got Emmanuel, Greenville, Emmanuel, New London. Those are the three that are probably indirect competition, if you want to say, with Bethlehem. New London, they're landlocked. They can't build anymore. Emmanuel, they're landlocked, but they're looking at a potential with some swampy land that they might be able to put some more buildings on, but that's up in the air. St. Peter, Waiwega, they are breaking ground for an early learning center in the spring here, but they're not going to build onto their school, just add an early learning center onto their facility. So that kind of leaves us open for that opportunity. All these schools are capped. Where are they going to go? St. Mary's in Greenville is putting on more classrooms right now as well too. But that's my comment on that question.
The only other thing I'll comment around that is Hortonville Area School District has updated their demographics report, and I think, is it available on their website? If you go to the Hortonville Area School District website, you might be able to find it. But basically, they did an updated demographics study for their school district specifically. So that's Village of Hortonville, Town of Ellington, whatever Town of Greenville. I don't know how big that district is, but it's kind of that same area that John talked about for the area of private elementary schools like St. Mary's, Emmanuel Greenville, Emmanuel New London, St. Peter, Weyerweger, right? So there's quite a bit of overlap. They're projecting, I'm going to say, really strong growth in terms of building development and growth of families with school-age children coming into the district, right? So even the public school is looking at, in the near future here, they're probably going to have to expand. They're going to need more elementary school space. They're going to need more middle school, more high school space. So I guess, does that answer your question around the competition portion, kind of things we're at? I mean, we're very fortunate in one regard, in that we do have the land. We've got the space here to build. Like, Emmanuel New London, they're landlocked. They're in the city. They can't go out unless they start buying up houses around the campus there, tearing those houses down and building on, right? So they've got some big restrictions. To your question about modeling the cost for the additional ELC and BLS staff, yeah, we can work on refining that. Like Matt said, that's something that we have to continuously do is keep going on and refining those numbers. And then what was the third question again?
I think
Yeah, so around the recruitment of how are we thinking we're going to get these people in our building? I don't really like the term, if we build it, we're going to have people come, because there's a lot more to it. So we've done a lot of advertising and recruitment efforts, but those need to get ramped up if we want to hit those benchmarks of 150, 250. And we also just need to evaluate, do we want to be 250 or are we okay with 150? Because as you grow, you start to lose that benefit of having that income balance out. And, do we want to be another 300 kids school that is surrounded by 300 kids schools? Maybe that's our factor that makes us different and unique as opposed to those other schools too. But yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it's a group effort. It's not just me going out and talking to people. It's honestly the growth that's happened. It's because of everybody that's in the pews and families that are here right now. There's no way we would be where we're at without families spreading the good word too.
Is our ELC currently at capacity?
Nikki is nodding her head yes.
For the staff that we have, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty common thing with ELCs in general, right? Is that the enrollment typically is driven by staffing. So Nikki spends a lot of time trying to work through staffing issues and balance the number of students she can have to align with the staffing that's available.
Any other questions? If not, we just thank you guys for attending. We'll probably be able to field more questions as they come up. I think one of the questions on the survey was, what other questions do you have if you're not unwilling to say right now? But again, thank you guys for coming, and hopefully this was informational for you.
Yep, thanks everyone.